We represent the GCLA and limousine operators before the California legislature. That's our primary objective, obviously. But we also work very closely with the governor's office. As Dave mentioned earlier, we work very closely with the California Public Utilities Commission, the California Highway Patrol, and the Department of Motor Vehicles. Each of these agencies touches your business. So I urge you, if you're not a member, to please join, because we want to know what your concerns are so that we can represent you properly. Let's talk about the legislative process a little bit. Last year was, in my opinion, an important and highly successful year for GCLA and the folks it represents. The legislature is not unlike any other organization. They react, just as you react. So when something happens, the legislature decides, have I got an idea how to fix this? And you'll recall that there have been a couple of issues that have been of major importance to your industry, and as a result, to the legislature and to the California public in general. One of those is transportation network companies. And GCLA does not have a position of trying to put TNCs out of business. That's not our goal, that's not our responsibility, that's not our objective. What is our objective is to work collaboratively with the transportation network companies and the Public Utilities Commission and the California legislature to assure that we're all operating together on a level playing field, and so that what is good for one is good for both. So let's get into some of those issues. You may recall that in December of 2014, 2 years ago, the Department of Motor Vehicles opined that TNC utilized vehicles were being utilized for commercial purposes. Therefore, they had to be licensed as commercial vehicles. And as all of you know, the price of the commercial vehicle license depends upon the weight of the vehicle. But on an average, we're talking about $25 a year. Uber and Lyft thought that was a bad idea. So they petitioned the governor's office to put a hold on that until there was actually some discussion, some study of whether or not, what they would argue, high school or college kids driving 10 hours a week, once a month or once a year or something, ought not be paying the $25. So the Department of Motor Vehicles stopped asking the TNC folks to register their vehicles as commercial vehicles. Legislation was introduced by Assemblymember Lowe from San Francisco, and his legislation said that there would be a period of time, 2 years, during which the DMV would not assess the fee, and the DMV would do a report. The DMV had promised they would do a report earlier. This was going to put it in the law. Well, GCLA opposed that legislation because, once again, our goal is not to affect negatively any industry, but rather to be sure that we're all treated the same. And every one of your vehicles is registered today as a commercial vehicle, as it should be, and there ought to be no difference. GCLA was quite successful in killing that bill, and we're very proud of that effect. And we did that, quite frankly, because many of you who are in this room tonight, many of you contacted your legislator at our request saying, hey, look, this is not a level playing field. This is a fee that we need to pay. Now, it made a lot of difference. This past year, as all of you know, I'm sure, much to your chagrin, the Department of Motor Vehicles ran a $350 million deficit. As a result of that deficit, every one of your vehicle license fees has gone up $10. Every one of them. The TNC license fee that was not collected would have helped that deficit a little bit by about $13 million. So our argument was, this is not just an industry issue, this is an issue of California's roads. Why do we pay the registration fee? We pay the registration fee to protect the highways and to improve them. Why isn't everybody who's using the vehicle for commercial purposes paying that fee? So we were very successful in killing that bill. We're, quite frankly, quite proud of it. Another issue that had to do specifically with the TNC issue, as all of you have read, is some of the concerns that many passengers have had about mistreatment. And so there was legislation that would require criminal background checks conducted by the Department of Justice on every TNC driver. GCLA did not support or oppose that bill because it was focused just on the TNC industry, not on the charter party carrier piece of the PUC's responsibility. We did not oppose or support that bill, and that bill died immediately. But there was legislation that GCLA very strongly supported, and that was voluntary background checks by the Department of Justice. Now, I've heard from many of you that you would like to incorporate the DOJ live scan background check into your business. You can't do that just by going to the Department of Justice and saying, hey, I would like to have APIs that employees have a DOJ background check, because the legislature has to authorize the Department of Justice to do that. So we supported legislation that would make it voluntary so that charter party carrier operators could go to the Department of Justice and make that request. We were not successful. That's one of our losses for the year. Fortunately, one of our small losses, but nonetheless, one of our losses. Another one of our losses was one that Cindy talked about a little bit. She didn't hit it directly, but she talked about the consumer telephone number. And that consumer telephone number is for consumers and for you to contact the PUC to register concerns that you may have, talk about your business, whatever the concern is, but you need to get hold of the PUC and you want to do it by telephone. CPUC, as Cindy mentioned earlier, has had a reduction in staffing. That's beefing up now, thank goodness, but so the consumer telephone line was not really as active as it ought to have been. But there was legislation that we supported that would have beefed up that consumer line and told the PUC, use some of this PUCTRA money that Cindy talked about to beef up that consumer line. And once again, the bill was defeated because of potential cost to the Public Utilities Commission. Now, talking about the Public Utilities Commission, Cindy mentioned the PUCTRA fee. 1/3 of 1% of your gross revenue. You know how much money that is in California? $3 million a year. That's what you are contributing to the PUC to do the enforcement of your industry. And so when Cindy says this is the kind of thing we're doing, that's your money that's paying for it. When I say, well, we'd like to see you do some more, that's your money that's paying for it. And so there is a sizable surplus in the PUCTRA account today as a result of the fact that the PUC for a few years was not doing as much enforcement as they might have been, but that has been beefed up, as Cindy indicated. So those funds are going to be well spent. We're going to assure that there's no increase in the PUCTRA fee because we want to have the money that you've already paid in spent properly. But those were our only two losses. Let me tell you about some of our wins. I mentioned that the legislature reacts to whatever goes on in public. And unfortunately, 3 years ago, there were back-to-back stretch limo accidents. One on the San Mateo Bridge that killed 7 women, and one in Walnut Creek that did not harm anyone, but it was a group of elderly women who were stuck in a vehicle and couldn't get out. Finally, somebody got them out of there as the vehicle was filling with smoke. Legislature overreacts. That's what we do. And so they introduced legislation and passed legislation that would have required that all vehicles that were on the road at that time had to be modified, and you had to have no fewer than 2 pop-out windows in the vehicle on the side. If you couldn't put 2 in, then you had to put 1 on the rooftop, and you also had to add a 5th door. And obviously something was impossible to do. So a year ago, 2 years ago now, we ran a bill that clarified that the 5th door is required only on those newly acquired vehicles after July 1 of 2015. So the one that you see here is appropriately in compliance with California law. But the other question of the pop-out vehicles, the CHP was supposed to have had regulations in place by the middle of 2015 so that you could then go to a retrofitter and have these vehicles modified to take out whatever you're going to take out and put in 2 pop-out windows, or if you can only put in 1, stick a hole in the roof. Well, the CHP didn't have a clue. They came out here to see Dave, and they went through his inventory and measured and talked and said, you know, this is a big job. The regulations were supposed to be in effect by July 1 of 2015, and by January 1 of 2016, you were supposed to be in compliance, or you could be cited by the CHP and your vehicle impounded. Well, 2016 came and went, so we did a bill a year ago to change the date from 2017 because the CHP said that they are continuing to try to get these regulations together. But you know what? In August of 2016, they still didn't have the regulations. So we did a bill at the end of the session to extend the effective date of the 2 pop-out windows in your vehicle to January 1 of 2018. So you are in compliance for the next year and a couple of months. And we have been told just this week that the CHP will have those new regulations established early in 2017. We will then review them. GCLA will be reviewing those regulations. If there's something that can be done, can actually be accomplished, then we will let the CHP and the state know that this is something that is workable. My thought is that it probably aren't going to be something that can be accomplished, and so we're going to be at the battlefield again, trying to fix the problem. So if you have a vehicle that was manufactured and modified prior to July 1 of 2015, and it doesn't have the pop-out windows, then you're going to have these 2 pop-out windows in January 2018. If you have a vehicle like this one that was manufactured and modified after July 1 of 2015, it has the 5th door, you're home free. But that was a tough fight because a lot of folks, a lot of legislators said, wait a minute, people died for crying out loud. You've got to fix these cars. Well, okay, we're happy to do that, but how about if you give us a regulation so that we can do it and we don't do anything to impair the structure of the vehicle? Do me a favor, no accidents, okay? Because it makes our job a whole lot easier. Last year, 2 years ago, you'll recall that near Sacramento, actually closer to Redding, a bus full of kids from Los Angeles visiting California colleges crashed, driver error, fell asleep, and a bunch of college kids were killed. Now, how do you fix that problem? You pass legislation, of course. And so the first legislation said that any bus that was transporting passengers for hire, and in California, a bus is any vehicle that has 9 passengers, has in excess of 9 passengers and a driver. So if you have a stretch that seats 15, by California law, you're a bus. So we had to work on that legislation because that's not really what was intended. And as a result of that, we were able to get the legislation amended so that a bus, as it relates to the requirements associated with that accident, and they're pretty severe. You have to have lights like an airplane on the floor. You have to have lights on the inside and the outside of the vehicle so that when there's an accident, a light blinks and says exit, exit, exit. You have to give pre-flight instructions to your passengers, telling them to put on their seat belts and do whatever it is that you're going to do if there's a crash. We've amended that bill so it only impacts those vehicles with a seating capacity of 39 or more. So you have a smaller vehicle, you've got 20, 25, 28, that law does not affect you. And that affects a lot of the people. that affects a lot of the people in this room. And again, it was GCLA fighting that like crazy, and it worked for us. Another, I labeled it general bill. Every one of you is a professional operator, running a professional business, hiring professional employees. Now that can't be said for all of the parties who transport people. And because of some of the publicity, quite frankly, about some of the TNC drivers, been big concern about alcohol content level. And so legislation was passed this year, which lowered the alcohol content level from 0.08 to 0.04 if you are driving a passenger for hire. And GCLA supported that legislation as well. So let me give you the scorecard. I've talked about 9 bills that passed last year, and of those 9 bills, GCLA was successful in supporting them and having the governor sign 7 and those 7 bills will become law on January 1 of this year. We're very proud of that record. We're going to come back next year, though, because one of the issues that I talked about, the 2 that we lost, quite frankly, had to do with background checks. And I know that many of you, as I said earlier, many of you said to me, I'd really like to be able to work with the DOJ on the live scan test for 2 reasons. One, because it's good, and number 2, because it's cheaper than hiring somebody to go out and Google that information for me. So we're going to work very hard with other people in the industry to try to get that legislation passed. We'll introduce it again next year. I want to speak just for a moment about the CPUC enforcement issues that Cindy raised. This past year, a new director of the Safety Enforcement Group, Nick Zangiani, was appointed. And Nick is doing a phenomenal job. One of the first things he did was beef up the call center staffing. The next thing he's done is try to get more and more employees into the enforcement side. I know personally that Nick is fighting with SFO to get CPUC inspectors located at that airport. So we're having a very cooperative and collaborative relationship. When something falls apart, when something that if you have a concern with the PUC, don't hesitate. Cindy gave you her card. Perhaps I wouldn't have done that had I been she, but Cindy gave you her card. Please take advantage of that. Let me give you an example. Down in Southern California, Ryan Silva bought a new vehicle. And the vehicle had to be inspected by the CHP before he could put it on the road. So he notified the CPUC notified the CHP did an inspection, and then the CHP forgot to contact the CPUC to say that they had done the inspection, so he was not given his permit to put that vehicle on the road. So he contacted the PUC, and the PUC said, oh, here's the problem. And so we haven't had the communication, and it usually takes from 30 to 45 days to get the permit. Ryan called me. I called Nick. 3 days later, Ryan Silva had his permit. I want you to know, she gave you the number, please. You're paying her salary. Please take advantage of that and make it work. She mentioned some of the technology pitfalls at the PUC today. We're working very closely with the PUC. You may not want to hear this, but a year and a half ago, GCLA supported a budget inclusion of $500,000, $500,000, to improve the CPUC technology so that you could do the kind of thing she said, wouldn't it be nice if you could just scan things? That's coming. Is it today? No. Is it coming? It's coming. And again, it's because we're utilizing the funds that you pay to benefit your industry. I know you want to go home, and so I want to wrap this up saying that it's been a pleasure and an honor representing you, but the success that we have is based entirely upon the support that you give GCLA and the information that you provide them. And if there are legislative issues that you think you want to have addressed, please see the GCLA folks, members who are here tonight, and share that with them. And when something comes up and there's legislation out there that impacts your industry, GCLA will be contacting you saying, hey, give us a hand. Contact your local legislator. You represent over 5,000 companies. That's tens of thousands of employees. I'll tell you, when we walk the halls of the state capitol and say we represent an industry that has tens of thousands of employees, people listen. So thank you for your help. Thank you for what you're doing, and I really appreciate your work.